Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams, and we're here to help you make the most of your minerals and royalties. And today we're going to talk about taking over the management of your minerals from a professional mineral manager. And now, we've talked about going the other way and hiring a mineral manager in episode 123, and also in the interview that we did with Jimmy Wright, who's a landman and a mineral manager, and that was episode 180. So we've covered that topic, but we've never talked about going the other way, Justin, and I know you've dealt with this personally, and there's many reasons why people might decide to do this.
Yeah, it kind of runs the gamut. You know, I think it is easy to get lost in the hubbub of just being a number with some of the banks and even smaller firms. Matt, you mentioned a situation where somebody was retiring. These are all reasons that you may get into this. And even if you do have a mineral manager, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be aware of some of this so that you can, audit the mineral manager.
Yeah, exactly. These are the things that your mineral manager should be doing. We're going to walk through the list of tasks that a good mineral manager will do so that if you are thinking about taking over the management of your interests, that you kind of have an idea of what might be in store, and then some of the tips and step-by-step actions you can take if you want to go down this path. And this is something that I'm helping a client with right now. So this was top of mind. And like Justin alluded to, their personal situation is that his great aunt originally owned all these interests, and it was being passed down through the generations. His mom is the current owner. They had a mineral manager who was an attorney, but the attorney's retiring. And so now they're faced with the decision of, do we need to go out and hire another mineral manager, or should we just take over the management ourselves? And that's what he's getting ready to take on. And he's got some time to do it. He's got the interest to learn about the things that need to be done. And so it's a good time for that transition if you're in that decision point anyway, and you're going to have to make a change. Well, if you're going to go ahead and take over ownership, maybe that's the time to do it. If you're going to have to do all of the notifications to the operators to let them know of the change of address and direct deposit information and all of that, so then you're not having to do it multiple times if you decide to take it over in the future. Well, just go ahead and do it up front and then, take on the responsibilities. And it may not be as daunting as you think. So we're going to go through a lot, and there's definitely some considerations and some education that people should be aware of and take on before they go down this path, Justin. But do you want to talk a little bit about your experience as you kind of have gone down this road yourself?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, Matt, is making sure you understand what documents you really need from the person who is managing it. And that's really the foundation. You want to get a grip on what is the history of it, where are the division orders, all of those critical things. And there's some major documents, production and income verification, division orders, leases, revenue statements. Those are all things that you need to be asking for. And it's easy for the mineral managers on the other side to kind of miss the documents. And I found myself going back and forth a lot with them saying, hey, where is this? What is the history on this? Where can I find this?
Yeah, and that's a great point, because there are times where perhaps you had the original mineral manager was a small bank and a small trust department or, mineral management department that had a personal relationship with your ancestors, and they knew the history, they knew the area. But, over time, things change and banks get acquired. And, maybe the original bank that managed been gobbled up 2 or 3 times, and now it's some huge bank trust department and you're just a number, right? So they don't have any connection. The mineral manager, some, junior person perhaps that is, managing a portfolio of several owners, and, they're having to juggle all those balls in the air. And so you're not getting their full undivided attention. It's being spread out over, multiple owners. And so if they have the right systems and processes in place, that can be fine, right? They can be able to do that because of software and things that will flag when there's an issue or discrepancy around revenue that's coming in, or when there are new leases or new rigs showing up, that they can be on top of those things. But there are a lot of times where maybe that's not the case. And, certainly if you think about any asset, whether it's real property, if it's minerals, if it's your portfolio, right, your retirement, you're going to always have a vested interest in the outcome. The outcome is going to directly affect you, whereas the person that you outsource management of those assets to, they're going to be only tangentially affected, right? If the portfolio goes down and they're getting 1% of the value, well, their revenue is going to go down. So they're incentivized to hopefully grow that portfolio. But at the end of the day, they're still going to get paid whether your portfolio goes down, and ultimately your retirement is dependent on that. And, certainly you got to stay on top of it. And there are great people out there that you can hire to do all kinds of management. But ultimately, I guess the moral of the story, what I'm trying to say is, we're going to always take the most care and do the best job, provided that we have the time to take on that task, right? So that's the big question and something to think about, because it is not something that, if done properly, takes zero time, right? There is some level of commitment that you're having to sign up for and going down this path.
You said it, man. And I think people underestimate the amount of education that they may have to do also to truly understand this and be able to properly manage it. And that's the other thing you really have to make the time for and be ready to take on.
For sure. Yeah. Well, so let's talk about why folks should consider managing their minerals themselves. What are some of the potential benefits of doing that?
Matt, I think you nailed the big one. I mean, nobody is more vested than we are. You get direct oversight of those assets. There's some cost savings that comes with the management fees, right? These folks can't do it for free. There's more involvement in the decision-making process. A mineral manager may have less likelihood to negotiate a lease, and this is not always true. Some are far better at it than the average mineral right owner, but some may not really try hard enough to reserve your rights. You're going to be faster in responding to opportunities. And then you've got that personal connection to the properties and knowing what's going on for not just your generation, but for future generations, and being able to pass that information on.
Yeah, those are great points. And of course, before you make that switch, I think it's important to understand the current structure and then what your professional mineral manager is doing today, right? So these are the things that you need to be thinking about and being willing to learn about and take on. And depending on your background, you may have a background in accounting, let's say, or a background with like being a paralegal or an attorney. And so you would have a leg up potentially on some of these administrative tasks. But in general, any layperson can learn about these things. It just takes, like Justin said, the dedication and the time commitment to learn about what you should be doing. And we'll talk about the resources and where you can go to learn about these things, because there's lots of information out there if you know where to find it. All right. So the first thing is you have to monitor and manage the revenue coming in, right? That's probably the most obvious thing, is that you have to cash the checks or set up the direct deposit and then review the revenue statements to make sure that you understand what's happening with your wells, right? If there are payment gaps, to reach out to the owner relations department within the operator to find out why. And then if let's say you're managing this on behalf of the family, right? Let's say you have a family LLC, maybe there is revenue disbursement to multiple family members that you need to be able to handle on some periodic basis. And so doing the accounting, right? Managing how much did we make? What are the expenses? Paying those bills. If you hire an attorney or landman, or if you have software that you're using, that you're, paying those bills and managing that side of things. So it's that sort of accounting and bookkeeping task. And an example of this, recently I have one of my larger interests. I didn't receive royalties for 2 months, and I was sort of surprised because those wells were producing. And so I reached out to the company and asked, why am I not getting paid? And by the way, I think that you owe me interest because, one of these payments is past the statutory timeline for needing to pay interest. Well, they replied back and said, well, actually we had an adjustment and reallocation of natural gas liquids. And so there was a negative balance. And so it hasn't reached the $100 threshold. And that's why you didn't get paid. So that is information that they don't tell you unless you ask for it. And there was a whole series of follow-ups after that, because I was wondering, well, okay, wait a minute, 85% of my revenue comes from oil. That doesn't compute, And so being able to understand, in that situation, okay, what are my rights under the state law? And then how do I ask for those things? Like in this case, I have right to ask for measurement, review and measurement audits. And so I'm following down that path of asking for the information to show me where this money went. How did you come up with that negative balance? And then is that actually correct? So those are the things the mineral manager you need to learn about and learn how to do. But again, it's just a matter of familiarizing yourself with the state statutes where those interests are located and what it says about payment timing and how do you need to notify the operator to protect your rights and all those types of things, which is a quick Google search is all it takes. Justin, what are some of the other administrative tasks that somebody needs to be willing to take on or understand?
I think one of the more important is your division orders. That's an ongoing thing that you'll experience managing your minerals, and knowing how to confirm those decimal interest, knowing where to find the deed so that you can calculate the decimal interest and how to find the information on the state regulator sites. Different information like that is really important when it comes to doing some of the administrative task. It's also maintaining those documents, ensuring you have those copies and they're organized, you're keeping up with them. The correspondence with the operators. So like you were saying, Matt, that could be several emails back and forth. There may be times where you're also working with an attorney to get their opinion on it. And then there's tax reporting and planning, which is no small task if you have enough interest.
Yeah, that's a great point because we have to pay estimated tax payments, right? If you're making enough in royalties, they're not going to deduct income tax out of that. And so you need to set aside a certain amount each year and then also pay that periodically to avoid penalties from the IRS. So those are things you need to be aware of. And certainly having a good CPA, they're worth their weight in gold, and you can give them your P&L and give them the information, and then they will tell you and kind of calculate the estimated tax payments and then do all that for you. So it's not something you have to get super versed in IRS tax code or anything. Definitely worth hiring a good CPA that can help you with that. But at the end of the day, they have to have something to base that calculation on. And so having accurate bookkeeping and accounting will help with that. And then the other side of things is the strategic management, right? So it's the big picture stuff. It's the understanding where operators are moving, where they're leasing and being prepared for those oil and gas lease negotiations and doing the research to find out what other mineral owners are getting in that area. And that can be done through your county clerk and recorder and doing a search for the oil and gas leases that have been recorded. And a lot of times, unless they're recording memorandum of lease, you can see the oil and gas lease and what terms the company agreed to. So you can use that to help your negotiations and find out what the company's been willing to offer to other owners and use that to get the best terms possible. And then the other thing is looking at where you have undeveloped minerals, where are there permit applications that haven't maybe been approved yet, or where, again, if you have recently leased acreage, that's a good indication that a company is probably going to move in that direction and may drill a well, in the next couple of years. And so staying on top of that to see when they permit the wells, when the drilling activity occurs, and then again, looking at the big picture of, how much production is coming from these wells and what's that going to look like next year so we can do some tax planning. And then thinking about the next step, right? The next generation, because a fact of life is that, all of us will pass on. And so at some point, we're going to have to give these assets up. So as much as you've heard the term, never sell your minerals, always hold on to them. Well, at some point, you're going to have to either sell them or hand them over to the next generation or donate them, I suppose, to charity. But at the end of the day, they're going to pass on to somebody else. And so having that estate plan and having a picture and a plan for what's going to happen when you're gone, and then bringing your kids on and teaching them about managing these things and finding somebody in the family that's willing to take on this role that you're currently doing and taking it on for the next generation. So those are things that are important and need to be thinking about as well. So Justin, let's talk about step by step, right? So let's say we've decided, okay, all of those things we've talked about, they sound doable. There are a lot of resources out there that I can lean on and people to lean on to help me do these things. What do I need to do to get started? So what's the sort of first phase that someone should think about?
Gathering an inventory of the holdings. I would start with what is producing in my mind. Then I would be looking at what is non-producing acreage, but really what property do you own? That is the first place to start, understanding where those deeds are, creating a list of all the properties, understanding what properties are active, what operators are active on them. Are they leases? Are they overriding royalty interest? Are they mineral rights? What is the actual ownership there? And then kind of just work forward. So for properties that are producing, where's that division order? Where's the production data? And then there may be documents you don't have. So you really want to be sure that for each property, you have a clear picture, you have all of your documents in place. So you need to be prepared to request the copies of those documents. Maybe that comes from the mineral manager. Maybe you have to work with the landman or even go straight to the county of that property. Nowadays, it's portals. So if you have an energy link that you need to set up, that would be something to consider. And then also past tax records. You need to keep the past 7 years of tax records. And so you would want to try to get as complete of a picture of that as you could.
Yeah, those are really good tips. And then, as far as the portals, like what Justin mentioned, the energy link, right? So if your mineral manager has access to your energy link, you don't have the credentials, you need to get the login credentials from your mineral manager in order to be able to log in, to download the revenue statements, to download reports. And then similarly, if they have any other type of mineral management software that they're using that is not proprietary, in other words, that is not unique to that mineral management company, that you could maintain an account after the fact, you'd want to get that account transferred over to you and find out what the login credentials are, or just get that transferred over to your new account that you could set up. So those are all things up front that you need to be doing. So that's kind of what Justin's talking about, is this may be in the initial phase where the mineral manager is still handling the day-to-day, and you're just in the process of understanding the scope of what you're taking on, beginning to transfer, at least getting access to those computer systems that you need. And there may be things out there that you don't even know about, right? So that's where this would be the time to go to look at missingmoney.com. And we'll put links on there to where you can go for each of the state comptrollers, or where the state assets are managed in terms of funds that have been escheated to the state. In other words, the royalty payments that maybe were tried to get paid to your ancestors, they never got deposited, so that the company at some point they hand it over to the state to manage and to administer. And so you may have to go claim those unclaimed funds if they're out there, if nobody in your family has actually gone through that process, because you are the only one that can actually do that, generally speaking. And that's something to think about. The other thing is, a lot of times you will have signed a power of attorney over to the mineral manager. And so you'll need to think about unwinding those documents. So once you've completed the transfer of everything, those are the things you need to be thinking about in the back of your head. Okay, what authority have I given them that I need to withdraw, and how do I need to go about doing that, right? So those are some other things. Justin, now as far as the administrative changes, you want to talk about sort of the step-by-step of, okay, we got an idea of what we own, we understand where it's located. What are the administrative things or tactical things that we need to be doing to get that all set up and ready to switch over?
Something that I really think is important to think about at this point is talking to both a financial advisor, a CPA, and an attorney to get some opinions, and be prepared that they may not all agree what'll be best. Maybe some decision on your part to decide, but you've got to decide your structure. And once you decide how you want to structure that, whether it's an LLC, perhaps the minerals are in a trust that you're going to be working with, that understanding is what you're going to need to go set up a bank account, so that you can open those new accounts and do direct deposit forms. You have to submit that to the operator, not only a change in ownership, but the new setup for direct deposit. And that's something you have to be prepared for there to be a delay from when you were getting paid through the mineral manager. That may halt things for a couple months. Operators typically have a stated window they try to handle this within, but there can be hiccups, and it's something you have to be prepared to follow up on. And you'll have to follow the directions for each operator on how they want that change of address. A lot of times they have a template, and you'll need to know which operators you need to notify, which you have notified, which have made the changeover, and then which you need to follow up with. Matt, depending on the type of structure you go with, you're also going to need a tax ID, and that would be for LLCs, some trust as well. And you're going to need to have that all in place before you start really pulling the trigger on changing ownership of the operators. Last thing you want is something to get caught up in a mix and have something to unwind.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, that's the thing. We're having a spreadsheet of all of your operators, all of the wells, all of those things in one place that you can use to track, like Justin said. Which of those have I already notified? Which have transferred over the ownership? And this is during the process of, filling out the change of address letters or change of ownership information. So that's something you have to actually do with each of the operators. You'll have to send over, if there's a change of entity structure, you have to have a deed that conveys the interest from the previous entity to the new entity. And that will have to get recorded with the county. And then you'll have to provide a copy of that recorded instrument to the operator and request a change of ownership. And then also, if there's a change of address with that, to give them the new address to be sending correspondence to, such as division orders, revenue statements, 1099s, and things like that. So that's a really important step. And it's super easy, but it is something that does require some monitoring and just kind of staying on top of. And then, like Justin said, in some cases, there's not going to be a change in the entity if it's a trust and you're keeping it within the trust and you're one of the trustees already and you have the authority to act on behalf of the trust. Well, it is just a matter of notifying the operators of the change of address, perhaps. Maybe you need to go to the post office and set up a P.O. box, so that you can start receiving those revenue statements. Because before they were going to the bank trust department or the mineral manager, and now you need to be the one that's getting those. Okay, so these are sort of like in that transition period as we have started to notify the operator, started to enact the change in ownership or change in management. Justin, now we're going to go into the other phase of that, actually implementing a management system and having a process in place. What are some of the steps that we can go through to set that up the right way from the beginning?
Matt, this depends a lot on how many minerals are you managing, how much information are you going to have coming your way, and do you need to monitor? Having copies of the physical documents is very important. We should really scan them in nowadays. It makes it so much easier to have those. Not that you don't need to keep the originals. There's lots of different cloud storage options. So if you're just dealing with a few properties and you feel comfortable using a spreadsheet and scanning those documents in, that's an option. There's also Mineral IQ nowadays, Matt. That is a wonderful platform. They have a couple different levels for mineral owners. Some provide more features than others. And then there's even more complex software that gets into, family offices that are really meant to kind of offer a holistic approach to managing the minerals. So you'll have to decide what's right for you in that way. But having an understanding of that system that you're going to use and starting with that system, maintaining that system and keeping it, consistent is really important because you'll need something to do with these documents as they come in.
Yeah, having a document management system, like Justin said, in the cloud, whether that's something like if you're a Mac user, an iCloud, and just setting up folders there that are getting backed up and that are getting stored in the cloud, or if it's on Microsoft OneDrive or Dropbox, and you got to think about things like, okay, who else is going to need to get access to these? Do I want to give other family members access to view the documents or get copies of them if they need to, just in case you get hit by a bus or something, right? So that other people have access to it. What's the best way? So you have backups on backups, so to speak, and others can get in there and access the information if they need to. And especially if you're starting to transition this to the next generation at some point, or want to think about that in the future, is, making it easy to give access to somebody. Let's say your kids live in a different state and they want to take on and help with the management, and you need to have something online or, something that they could access remotely, something like Dropbox, or if you want to share Google Drive, or, again, any of those other options I mentioned have options to do that as well. And as far as the documents you need to be managing, we have a pretty comprehensive list in episode 34, which is important documents for mineral rights and royalties. So definitely check that episode out. We go through considerations for how to organize this stuff, and I talk about it in more step-by-step detail in my mineral management basics course. I have a document checklist there of all the important documents you need for your minerals and royalties. And that checklist can be used for each property to say, okay, what do I have? And you can check each of those off. What am I missing? And then what's missing will inform, what you need to do to go and get copies of those missing documents. So for example, like Justin mentioned, maybe it's doing a title search to get deeds and leases, or, if you're missing the revenue statements, from the last, let's say, year or last 6 months at least, for taking those over from the mineral manager, it's getting copies of all those electronic revenue statements so that you have that recent history that you can look back on to understand the trends over time. Because that's a lot of what we're talking about here. It's not like so much the actual number today, but it's what is that trend, and does it make sense, or is there a discrepancy? And certainly software can help with that. And again, if you're using a more sophisticated mineral management software, a lot of those will have document management solutions that are linked to all the other features and functions that that system offers. And so that could be another option for where you store those documents, is in that mineral management software. So, okay, revenue accounting, Justin, this is something, if you're an accounting person or if you like math, then it's like, you're probably excited about getting into this, but some other people may be thinking, well, I don't really want to have to deal with a bunch of spreadsheets or all of that kind of thing. What are the considerations as we're tracking revenue from these assets? What are the big picture things we need to be thinking about?
I mean, one of the major is income verification. We hear a lot, Matt, where people they're not sure if they're being paid correctly, and having that data is really how you're going to find that out. Ensuring that your payments are lining up with state production volumes, and then ensuring that the taxes that you paid to the operator, what the net income was, what you're going to owe in taxes. It's all very important. And this can be done with a spreadsheet, like you said, Matt, for people who aren't intimidated by that. But many of the softwares also offer this. There's also hybrid options where you have software like EnergyLink that offers some reporting to you on production and those kinds of things, but it doesn't necessarily offer the state picture. So it's kind of understanding, what information do you need to get where, how often are you going to do that, and being prepared to look at this as if it's budgeting or reviewing something regularly. It's not a set it and forget it kind of thing.
Yeah, and if you don't want to have to track all this stuff in Excel, this is where spending a little bit of money on one of these mineral management softwares can be very helpful, because it could be simply a matter of generating a report, and it keeps track of it, for multiple years. And so you can go back and look at the end of the year, I'm going to generate a report of all my wells, all the revenue. And if you have a little bit of experience with Excel, you can create a pivot table and say, okay, what did operator A pay me in 2022? What did they pay me in 2023? Does that look correct based on what I'm expecting, what I know the activity levels going on? You can look at things like the deductions, and those software systems, to the extent that the revenue data is accessible by them and EnergyLink, because majority of the operators, they manage the revenue accounting and the royalty statements through EnergyLink, and you can get access to download the Excel spreadsheet versions of those revenue statements and then reports for all of your wells and for all of your revenue. So that's a way to get an inventory without having to manually type it all in. If all of your wells are already in EnergyLink, or the majority are, you can download a list of all your wells and all the details with it. And then you can, if you have others that are outside of EnergyLink, you can go in and add them in, and then that'll give you a complete picture without having to type everything in from scratch, especially if you have hundreds of wells that you're getting royalties on. So that's a little bit of a shortcut you can use. And again, I'm not currently getting any sort of paid by Enverus or EnergyLink. I use Mineral IQ in managing my interests, and they are a past sponsor of the show, though, in full transparency. But certainly there are other options out there, but they're seem to be one of the kind of entry level points for that. And especially if you're getting most of your revenue through EnergyLink, it's kind of a no brainer. So, all right. So best practices, Justin. Okay. Regular monitoring. What are the things that we are doing in terms of keeping track of things? What do we need to be monitoring? What do we need to be looking for?
Having an idea of when your leases expire, when you're receiving your payments. Typically on a regular basis, you're going to be checking production reports, reconciling payments against production, monitoring what nearby drilling activity there might be or might not be. With Mineral IQ, it offers some features on some of this with notifications if there's nearby activity, but there is just an understanding that you need to have of what are your dates, what is going to be active till when, and what action might be needed. Something else that you should be thinking about is building a team of people around you. Having a landman to work with. If most of your properties are in one area, having somebody that you trust that can research information is a really important thing. And there's a wonderful organization called the AAPL, where you can find independent landman, and they have a great directory. An oil and gas attorney is going to be an important thing to have. Somebody that you can, if you get a lease opportunity or you're resetting a lease, you're absolutely going to want an oil and gas attorney to look at that. And then having a tax professional that understands minerals is hugely important, because it's not something they all encounter every day. And having somebody who truly understands it is a really wonderful resource. And then how are you going to learn about it? How are you going to stay up to date on changes? This is not something that the law never changes. It's not something that you don't have to stay up to date. So organizations like NARO is a wonderful option for staying up to date on changes and getting the new education as it comes. And then if you're going to be managing a portfolio, Matt, becoming a certified mineral manager is really a beneficial thing. And many of the organizations offer some kind of program like that, but you could go all the way to being a certified landman, or you could do something like a mineral management program like NARO offers, which is a bit of an in-between to where you're not taking it to a professional level. However, you're getting a really thorough education on managing minerals.
Yeah, and that mineral management program, so with National Association of Royalty Owners, that's probably the biggest resource, the best kept secret in oil and gas, minerals, and royalties is NARO, because we offer all kinds of education. There's monthly webinars, there's in-person events at the state chapter level and the national level with education on various topics. And so, in order to stay on top of trends, there's monthly newsletters, there's, again, the networking that you get with meeting other like-minded mineral and royalty owners that maybe own interest in the same state where you are or in the same area. And so helping to share best practices, share learnings, what works, what doesn't, that's super helpful and can help shortcut your way to being successful at this. And the other thing with that mineral management program, so if you're coming into this brand new, I would highly recommend that. Even if you don't really care about that certification, you don't need it for managing other people's minerals or doing consulting or anything like that, but they have a registered mineral manager level and then a certified mineral manager or CMM level, which is the next level above that. But the RMM is a great way to get the basics for what you need to know to be able to do your own calculations to verify your interest on a division order, for example, because that is something that there's some nuance to, and there's some ways that you need to learn about. Okay, if I'm in Texas and it's an allocation well, or if I'm in this other state where there's pooling, like how do I go about calculating that decimal? So when I get a new division order, that I know how to calculate that number that's on the division order to make sure that it's correct, and not have to rely on hiring, a consultant to do that. And that can be an important thing to learn how to do. And it's not hard and it's not complex math. It's just a matter of a few simple things to know about. And all of that is the kind of step-by-step education you get through NARO, through that mineral management program. I also offer an online course, Mineral Management Basics. I go through some of those things around performing a title search and what documents you need to have and keeping track of all of that. And then also the background, like what are the types of oil and gas interests and how do these interact with each other? How do I read a legal description on that deed to find my interest on a map? And then step by step, how do I go through and use my state oil and gas commission website to find copies of the plats and the drilling permits for my wells and all those kinds of things. And so those are the resources that, whatever path you decide, having those educational resources available so if you get stuck with something, you know where to go for help. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of technical aspects around this. I learn something new every day and I do this for my day job. And so certainly having people you can lean on or organizations like NARO that can help educate you and your next generation is very valuable. Okay, so we talked about resources. We talked about some of the regular monitoring that we need to be doing. And again, a lot of these automated systems can help streamline that. what are some of the common issues that as a mineral manager, as I'm taking over ownership of these things, then I need to be prepared to handle, Justin? What are the issues that we may run into?
The things we hear about a lot, missing payments, like you mentioned at the beginning of the show, Matt, why I not receive a royalty payment this month? There are valid reasons. It's not an uncommon occurrence, but it's not something where they, go post flyers. It's something that you typically have to contact them. They're managing many, many, many wells, and there's many owners for each well. And so it is difficult for them to get the communication out. And I would say most operators really rely on mineral right owners to reach out to them. They're not typically trying to withhold the information. They're just not always sending it out to you. Know your rights and know your audit rights. I mean, that's something that we hear all the time where people are like, I don't think I'm getting paid right. And that's something where you need to be prepared to either understand how to audit that or know who you're going to go to that can perform an audit for you. I mean, there are lots of different people, Matt, but depends on your interest, whether that would be worth it to you or not. Lease negotiations is also very important. This is something where, you really need to be up to date with what the current laws are. We've been doing a lot of talking about different scams that are occurring in mineral rights. So you need somebody competent and up to date that can review these legal documents. You don't want to sign a legal document until an attorney has reviewed that, who knows about the area, knows about what's going on, and can help you. And don't make rush decisions. It can become overwhelming, especially when you're going through the process, but that's something where these are lasting decisions and they could have an impact for many, many, many years. A great thing to look at, Matt, with negotiating an oil and gas lease is we did an episode, which was episode 6, on how to negotiate an oil and gas lease. But even then, the negotiation is just part of it. Ensuring the legal part of it is sound is a whole nother issue. And Matt, even as long as we've been doing the show, what we would suggest to mineral right owners has changed. And there's clauses that we now would consider including where we wouldn't have 10 years ago, and that'll continue to change as time goes on.
Yeah. And, some of the things like Justin's is alluding to, things like lithium, right? These are new advancements and new developments over the past couple of years where maybe we need to reserve our rights explicitly to lithium in an oil and gas lease so that if it's not ambiguous and doesn't allow room for interpretation, and perhaps losing those interests because it goes into the produced water and that becomes owned by the operator, and then you don't have the right to go back and do anything about it. So there's some definitely, things where having an attorney who's staying on top of the case law, staying on top of these trends can help make sure that as they review your lease, and maybe you do 80% of the work and they come in and just make sure that, hey, there's this little change we want to make here or this over here. Over time, you'll get really good at negotiating leases. You'll understand that this is a business negotiation. You won't treat it like, just to sign the document and send it back kind of a situation. You need to understand this is a business negotiation. There is room to negotiate more money, higher royalties, better terms, all those things. And as you get an oil and gas lease, it's a good thing when you get a lease because it's hopefully an indication either, certainly you're going to get a lease bonus payment, but then hopefully some royalties will be following soon after. So definitely something where you don't want to rush the decisions because it can have a lasting impact for generations. So these leases that we sign today could be held by production for the next 50 years. And if you rush through and just try to get the highest bonus payment today, get the lowest royalty, well, maybe you're adversely affecting the value of your family's interest for the next generation. And so don't rush the decisions is the moral there. Another issue that you may run into are title issues, right? So you may find that you get contacted to sign a lease, and then there is actually some missing property that you never knew about, that never was part of the original probate from your ancestors. So you may need to go in and do things like getting with your attorney, or maybe finding an attorney in the state where those interests are located if it's not, near where you live, and going through ancillary probate. In other words, getting that asset transferred over to your name or to the new asset, the new family structure that you've set up, so that you can get paid royalties in the future. So they may be willing to lease you, but then in order to put that into pay status, you may need to go through and cure a title issue that is out there. So that's not uncommon. Whatever the situation, having a good attorney, they can help you navigate that. And that's not something you have to know what to do from the beginning. It's just to know that, hey, there's an issue here. I need to go get help. I need to talk to my attorney, make them aware of this new property that wasn't on the inventory, and we need to go through and figure out, what are the next steps. So lots of things. Some of these are pretty, I would say, common or recurring things that you'll get really good at. And that's, things like monitoring your revenue statements and monitoring your payments and identifying missing payments, notifying the operator, asserting your rights, negotiating leases, things like that are kind of part and parcel of managing your minerals on a day-to-day basis. And how many assets you have, it may be a fairly infrequent thing or maybe a very frequent thing, just depending on the number of assets you own, number of mineral tracts, the extent of your portfolio. And so, it can be a range of, from, hey, I get a new lease every couple of years, and so it's not something I do every day, up to like I have thousands of mineral tracts across multiple states, and I'm getting lease offers, once a month at least. And so I'm like, I have a system down and I'm doing this a lot, and that's like a big part of what I do. So it really just depends on your situation. But again, anytime you feel overloaded or feel overwhelmed, there are a lot of people that you can lean on for help. There are landmen out there that can help you run title, attorneys to help you go through and cure title, to negotiate leases or any sort of contract. If you have surface rights, for example, a surface use agreement, things like that. CPA, to help you with the tax planning and the accounting side of things. And then, having a good petroleum engineer if you need to get an appraisal for any reason. Those are the types of things that people have on speed dial, so to speak. Okay, so we've talked about what's entailed with taking over management of our interest. Justin, what about looking ahead and thinking about the future? What are the types of things that a really proactive mineral manager can do to stay on top of what could happen for the next generation and beyond?
Yeah, man. And I think it's worth talking about this because even more so than all these other things we've talked about, from like title issues and I'm not getting paid correctly, the number one thing we hear is, my mother left me, my parents left me, my grandfather left me, and I'm trying to figure out. And I think that is just one of the most common things. And it comes honestly, if you only had one property, or maybe your parents had one property and it wasn't paying for many years, it gets forgotten and nobody really talks about it. Nobody passes the knowledge over. So making sure that the next generation is aware of what it is that you own, making sure that they know where to find the information about what you own, getting them involved if they're interested in being involved is a really wonderful thing. But if they're not interested in getting involved, it makes a lot more sense to care about something once you're receiving the money. So making sure that information is available to them some way, somewhere, so that they can put these pieces together is critically important. And as you go through this process, Matt, I think people will understand what it means to take this over, and just, imagine being able to save that for the next generation and not have to put them through the time and expense. Something we often talk about, Matt, in this world is how fractionalized ownership has become. And because of that, it can make it really tricky for it to make sense to hire these experts. So, getting with an estate planning attorney, if you have a large swath of properties, is a really important thing. That estate plan can really communicate that information. It can also be sure that maybe this doesn't get split up, but can be held together so that it still makes sense financially to work with these folks. And those succession plans are just really important. And also knowing where you're going to store those records and communicating that. Matt, there's also market monitoring, which as a mineral owner, I don't know that I do as good of this. I keep up with like the changing laws and things, but I don't keep up with oil price like you do, Matt. And that's something you do really well. I think you would pretty much know where it's at on any given day. But staying up with market trends is something to understand, because though it lags, if you see depressed gas prices for 6 months, you can expect that to be reflected on your royalty statement if you have gas wells.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think understanding those macroeconomic trends and understanding the implications of, new administrations. It's interesting. I've had conversations with several owners and several clients that have expressed concern or a certain opinion about, with Trump coming into office, well, that means oil and gas prices are going to fall because there's going to be a ton of drilling all of a sudden and oversupply, and so gas and oil prices are going to fall. And I said, well, actually, I think gas prices are going to go up, and because there's increased demand with LNG exports and AI data centers and all these, larger trends that are going to be bullish for natural gas prices. And we've talked about this a lot on this show, but it's, understanding those dynamics and then also understanding the fact that companies have implemented capital discipline over the past 4 years. Many that went bankrupt during the pandemic or during that downturn in 2020, they've restructured. They're only spending free cash flow that comes into drilling new wells. And so just because maybe there's a lower regulatory hurdle to go after to get permits, that maybe means that they have to spend a little bit less money or a little bit less time to go through jumping through the hoops. But at the end of the day, there's only a certain number of wells they can drill per year, given the amount of cash flow that's coming in from operations, from producing oil and gas and from selling it and their existing wells. And so those are sort of constraints on the industry that I don't see going away really anytime soon or ever again. And so just because there's a different regulatory environment doesn't necessarily mean that there's all this pent up demand for drilling that is going to get unleashed in the first 6 months after Trump gets into office. It's going to be pretty much the status quo. Now, there'll be some better things for gas markets, such as if he lifts the LNG export license ban that the Biden administration implemented. So if they get rid of that, then that opens up the door to approve more of those projects that have been sitting kind of on the back burner waiting for their permits. They haven't gotten the license yet to export LNG to certain countries. And so if they get that, then that allows the project to move ahead and allows more facilities to get built and then more demand to come online. So that would be bullish for natural gas prices here in the US. And so those are the things I think are positive if you think about like deregulation side of things. But it's not going to be an overnight, like flip the switch, my oil prices are going to go down. There could be other things that could cause that, but not that. And so I think it's just understanding those industry trends, understanding the bigger picture and how things can affect you over the long term, and then not getting too spun up about change in administration each time, whether it goes one way or the other. And then also just understanding what are the big sources of demand and where are those trends heading? And then what does that mean for my future revenue? Because having a picture of, okay, is this likely to start going up over time, or is it going to be going down over time? And then that can help you plan for the amount of money that's going to be coming in. What do you need to do? And how do you need to track that? So those are the kinds of things you can be doing. And it's kind of fun, to stay on top of those things. It's not real hard. It's not something you have to spend a ton of time on a day-to-day basis. It's just, when you see a news article, understanding the economic equation behind that, supply and demand, and that's the biggest driver for oil and gas. And then how are they going to affect supply and demand over time? So yeah, at the end of the day, I think the big takeaway here is it's definitely something that you can take on if you're interested in taking over the management of your family's assets because you feel like maybe it's not getting done properly today by your current mineral manager, or you just want to take a more active role. It's certainly something that if you are willing to spend the time to educate yourself and to help set up the network of trusted advisors, it can be something where you can set up a lasting legacy from your family. You can protect that asset and not have it get eaten away by fees every year, management fees. And you can probably do a better job than somebody that's having to manage a portfolio of, 20 other mineral interest owners. And, you'd be looking at it with a closer eye to making sure that things are done proactively. So it can be a very rewarding experience just if you have the time to do it. Again, and the time to stay educated and the willingness to stay educated is probably the biggest thing. Is you have to be willing and coachable and be willing to learn. And as long as you have that, you can definitely do it. And there are lots of folks out there that can help. And if you need any guidance along the way, definitely consider my Mineral Management Basics course. You get email access to me if you have questions as you're going through the process and you want some tips and just sort of somebody looking over your shoulder, making sure things are being done the right way. I'm happy to help. So definitely leverage Narrow as well. We'll link in the show notes to where you can find out more about that organization. Both Justin and I are involved with Narrow and volunteer. It's a great organization and lots of valuable information at your fingertips if you join. So hopefully this is helpful and we'll get you started on the process of managing your family's minerals. So thanks again for listening. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.